Welcome to Annunciation Radio's Faith with Reasons, the program that examines what the Church teaches and why. Faith with Reasons.
And a good afternoon. I'm Tim Boulware and Shayne Stanfield joining us today. I'm in for Ron Finn. Is like, I'm surprised you didn't go through the door, Shayne, and say, "Who are you? Why are you here?"
I know you, Tim.
Oh, I know. No. But what I was saying is, so Ron's away, and so we have show number 458, and so I've been on with Ron before.
Yeah.
So I replaced both of you guys for one show.
Oh yeah. You sat in both seats.
I know. I like the captain's chair. I call this Captain Kirk's chair,
and that's fine. You can keep the captain's chair because, in fact, when I walked in, I asked. I had to make sure that you do not run that board, right?
Yes. So I have to quiz you here. If you had to come over here, what would you do?
I sweat a lot.
Well, you could do that outside.
Yeah, particularly with these temperatures today, for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. It is a hot one. It's supposed to cool off for the weekend, so if you're hearing the replay, it should be a little bit nicer for you. We do want to say that if you are listening, you are listening here, but and if you missed it, there are other opportunities. I know Sacred Heart in Fremont has their night of mercy coming up. Or healing, sorry. Night of healing. Yeah. Okay. Well, I knew it was one of those words. Night of healing coming up on next month, but tonight is the one at St. John 23rd.
St. John 23rd, yeah. And I think those are monthly. And they tend to get around the diocese with them and make it convenient for folks around. But if you haven't attended one, it's a really enriching experience. And I would encourage anybody, to check one out. You might become a regular. I know quite a few people that attend on a regular basis. I've only been to a couple.
Yeah, I don't know anyone who doesn't need a little healing. So
absolutely.
That's it. And my wife wanted to go. She's going to the one at St. John 23rd tonight, and because she has to put the one on at Sacred Heart next month. So
she's taking notes.
She's learning all she can. That's right. So 6:30 is the mass, and then after that, the night of healing will begin. So
very good.
Very good. So let's welcome in our guest here on Faith with Reasons, Father Eric Culler, and he is a Judicial Vicar of the Diocese of Toledo Tribunal. We're going to talk today a little bit about annulments and tribunals and everything. You're also the pastor at St. Richard in Swanton. So
That's right.
Good afternoon.
Thanks. Good being here.
Yeah, it is nice it's nice to have you on. So why don't you give us a little bit about your background and a little bit, and we'll then work up to how you got to be in the tribunal.
All right. Well, I'm from Lexington, Ohio, near Mansfield. So I think my parents' property is the furthest property from Toledo. It used to be 2 hours and 15 minutes to get to Toledo for meetings. So I grew up on a farm there in Lexington. Went to Lexington Public School, attended Resurrection Parish. Then after that, went to University of Dayton. I was thinking about priesthood then. I wasn't sure. So I thought, well, I'll just go to this Catholic school, take some theology classes, see what I like. There was a good discernment group there. So I got to knew other kids who were seeking and then attend daily mass, a lot of good classes. So that by the end of that college experience, I knew I was called to seminary, either Dominican or diocesan. So I did a retreat and I asked God, okay, which one, God? You tell me. He said diocesan. So here I am.
Wow.
So ordained in 2008, went to the Pontifical College Josephinum, and my first assignment was Tiffin, St. Mary's, St. Pius X in Sycamore, and then next year Calvert Catholic Schools. So I was there 3 years as associate, then 6 years at Willard St. Francis Xavier, New Washington St. Bernard, did a full term as pastor at those two places. Then went away to canon law studies, which brings me here today. And I've been at St. Richard now. It's been 4 years. I got there in 2019. It's hard to believe. Time has passed fast. So pastor there, then also judicial vicar at the Tribunal for the diocese.
Wow, that's quite amazing. So, I mean, with all your different experiences, what made you wanted to learn about canon law?
The funny thing about canon law is no one goes into it usually wanting to learn it. Even our professors I asked them, would you guys want to study canon law? They said, oh no, the bishop told me to go. So out of obedience,
so
they
you were
went.
Tapped.
And these are the pillars of canon law.
Did he tell you?
He did, yes.
Okay, you were tapped. Okay.
No, but I was open for further studies, and I said whatever the church needs. And canon law is one no one thinks about. We took a class on it in seminary, 2 classes or so, and we knew that it existed. But then to be a canon lawyer, A lot of us don't think we would do that ourselves. But it's really beautiful. It's we'll talk more about it, of course, but seeing the intersection of liturgy, dogmatic theology, moral theology, so many things come together in canon law. So it is kind of a nice summary of all other disciplines. So studying it was a nice refresher for me in other areas of theology, and it's nice to see it's about a practical application of our faith to reality. So it really is helpful for that.
So you have 3 letters after your name, JCL. So that's
right.
Judicial Canon Lawyer?
Well, it's Juris Canonici Licentiate. So
okay.
a license in canon law. So juris coming from be the law part. And then the canonical law means the law of the Catholic Church.
Okay. Now, how different is that with civil law?
In our country, it's rather different. Our civil law system is based on common law from Britain. So it's all about precedent, what cases were decided before. But canon law follows the Roman law model, which other systems like the Napoleonic Code, other ones in Europe, they would use that, where its principles the judge applies to particular situations. Okay. Different focus on that. So they grew up at the same time, the Roman law and then the canon law in the Middle Ages, bringing those back. So it's different, a little bit different system, more about principles, applying them to the practical situation.
So you actually have to have a license in this. When you go, you do your schooling, so you actually get licensed to practice canon law.
You do, and it follows the European system where we have bachelor's, master's, doctorate. They have bachelor's license, doctorate. They're sort of kind of the same, roughly. So this one, just like passing a bar for civil law. For my program, we had to take all the classes, all the coursework, do a board. We had a board interview for an hour with 3 professors. I had to write a thesis also.
Wow.
And once you pass all those, then you can be licensed to practice canon law in the whole world.
What was your thesis?
Mine was about the use of parochial administrators in vacant parishes. That's something that's become more common now, is there's not enough guys to pastor, someone's got to fill the space. So,
Now, do you have to learn any of the civil law? As you know, to understand it, because I'm sure there's got to be some sort of interaction, or maybe they're totally separate. I mean,
there are some intersections.
Legal matters that may come into the church.
Very true. Yeah. We rely on civil lawyers for those, like Tom Antonini, others at the Diocese. They help with the civil law side. We did take just one course in American civil law, and most about the intersections where it would overlap.
Like 101?
Exactly, yes. It was a crash course. But many times canon law does defer to the local civil law about like contracts. The church can't possibly cover every situation, every country in the world. So some things there's like, whatever the civil law has, just follow their procedures for this. So it is helpful to know that. But it depends on your area of expertise in canon law. You would focus more on the civil law or less.
So I know we're going to talk about annulments, which is quite fitting for what you do. But what are some of the other broad areas where canon law is necessary? Because I mean, there seems to be I don't know. You would think that a lot of this would be civil, but yet you don't have civil law in the church. You have canon law. The church chooses to follow canon law pertaining to its own matters.
Yeah, the law, because the church, then a group of humans, has certain laws and procedures to govern our relationship with each other. It'd be chaos otherwise, right? So from the very earliest centuries, the councils like Nicaea, they had canons. They're like, hey, this situation arose. How do we deal with this practically? Do this and don't do that. So they made certain laws. They've been to collect these later on in history. But it wasn't until 1917 we had a code of canon law, which is all the laws in one place. You apply these laws, universal church, there you go. It was updated in 83. So it covers all sorts of things like any society has. How do members relate to each other? If there are disputes, how are those resolved? And the current code has various sections. Some are about finances, about teaching in the church, the sacraments, how are those supposed to be practiced? Then, of course, procedures. We heard some late in the news about delicts or penalties in the church. That was revised recently, Book 6 of the Code. So there are different books of the Code that deal with different aspects of life as a Catholic in the universal church. And so the tribunal, where I work, is one aspect of that, which would be a court system. Like any law system has courts to resolve disputes, figure things out. We have that as well in the Catholic Church.
Oh, wow. So well, actually, you've really described a very wide range of activities. So if they would call you in if there was a dispute over the sacraments, in other words.
They certainly could. Yeah, typically there are other canon lawyers besides me, of course, in the diocese. Sister Rosemary Timmer, our chancellor, she would deal more with the law of our diocese, our particular law, and a lot of those kind of policies, she would deal with those. So not all canon lawyers work in the tribunal. She does help us from time to time. So, but yeah, there's different aspects of it to deal with. Oftentimes, judicial vicars of dioceses will be a canon lawyer because they have to manage different parishes, how those things work out. Liturgical law overlaps with canon law too. So some of those could be issues where how are the sacraments being done incorrectly? How should we legislate these, make sure they're done correctly? And then even governing Catholic universities, they have certain laws to follow under the teaching office of the church. So there's many, many aspects to govern just how do we practically live out our faith here and now in the real world. That's what canon law deals with, applying the theology to the concrete.
It sounds really complicated.
You know, like anything.
You have a variety of different people. You have a variety of different things that come by your desk. So, what normally do you see in terms of those who are involved with these? I mean, are they parishioners, pastors? I mean, what do you have?
As far as canon lawyers?
Things you deal with.
Well, let's see. For me, primarily the tribunal, like I said, that's sort of the court system aspect of the church. So we would deal primarily with marriage annulment cases. People want to clarify their status in the church and see if their marriage was invalid. So that's mostly what we deal with. It could be disputes between parishes. Again, perhaps they border each other. Is this land ours or yours? You know, that could be something. Or the status of a school, which parish does it belong to, or religious order could be something. There can be rights disputes that take place like that. And also just if establishing pious foundations in the church, like an endowment fund or something using church law, that would have to have canon lawyers consult about that. The interesting thing, we took a trip to Rome during a part of our schooling, and we saw every congregation, or call it dicastery, they're called now in Rome, departments of the Holy See, they all have canon lawyers in them.
Wow.
Because it's all like, okay, how do we actually do this thing now? You know, the sacraments, whether it's religious law, all the different dicasteries or groups have a canon lawyer to see practically what do we do based on the law.
It's going to be the go-to guy. I mean, they're going to need an answer, and they want
indeed
the correct answer right now.
Yeah, and it's that practical application of the theology to concrete situations. You know, so we, for example, the new Code of Canon Law 1983, when John the 23rd called the Second Vatican Council, one of his goals was a new Code of Canon Law. Already from 1917, it was out of date. But they were going to do that, and they said, why don't you guys finish the council first, then we'll know what we should base our law on. So they said, okay, let's do that instead. It took many years then, till 83, to be able to make the new Code of Canon Law based on the theology.
So who's the judge? I mean, is there a courtroom somewhere, and where is that? I mean,
do they have a gavel?
Yeah.
There's no gavel, alas. In the courtroom, we have far less auspicious facilities than many other civil courts do. But indeed, for every case, there would be a petition is presented by the person, whatever they wish, if they want to consider their marriage, is it invalid or valid, or some dispute case or something, they would present a petition. The judicial vicar, me, would look at it and say, can we accept this case? Are we competent? Does it fall within our jurisdiction? If so, we say, okay, we admit the case, and I would appoint a judge to it, a sole clerical judge, priest, deacon, or bishop, could be a judge alone, or a panel of 3 judges.
Okay.
So for marriage cases, 3 judges is preferred. We'll be at that very soon, but it can be a sole clerical judge. And then evidence is gathered, like any courtroom, in this case mostly by in-person interviews, perhaps written depositions. It's all gathered together. We publish it. The parties can look at it. There's a back-and-forth so-called discussion phase, not as argumentative as courtroom drama is.
Yeah.
So we discuss back and forth. The judge has to weigh in, or the judges look at all the evidence, then make a decision.
Wow.
So what kind of qualifications does the judge have? I mean,
the judge has to be licensed in canon law, at least a license or a doctorate in canon law.
So they're equal to you.
I am a judge also, in fact.
All right. Yeah.
So by office, judicial vicar also functions as the judge. So
I was going to ask if you wanted to be a judge, but if you already made that.
we wear many hats in the canon law and the tribunal. So yes, I function as the judge myself many times. But we also have other judges, too, who work on the tribunal.
So do you find yourself in a position that you have to necessarily recuse yourself? And, you know, you can't serve as judge, but you serve in your daily position?
Yeah, very rarely, because even if it were parishioners that were on a case, again, I'm impartial to looking at the situation involved. You know, so the evidence is still weighed. There's still arguments back and forth. And again, it's not a contentious process, unlike the American civil law is a contentious process. There's kind of a back and forth sort of fighting, which like shows like Law and Order show in a very dramatic fashion. You know, ours, it's all, everyone wants to find the truth, no matter which side you're on. You have a certain perspective that you argue and you present, but if the truth is evident, no one's going to argue against the truth, because we all seek the truth in the church. So that's one distinction of the canonical system versus the civil system.
Wow. And I would imagine there's not many punishments handed out. I mean, you're making decisions, but I mean,
well,
I guess the worst would be excommunication.
Well, actually, there are penal cases. I mentioned delicts in the church. We call crimes in the church. Those were clarified recently. A new Book 6 of the Code came out, the Code of Canon Law. So yes, there can be criminal trials in the church, and they would function the same way. They would have a judge, a petition is made, that there's a crime, a judge, and a court's constituted, there's a decision too. So yeah, so we could do those cases as well at the tribunal. We don't really do any right now. But there are various crimes like desecration of the Eucharist, for example. Would be many are reserved to the Holy See because they're so egregious, but there are lesser crimes as well, we can imagine. So yes, that can be a case too, a criminal trial.
So how do you handle a crime? And I know severity plays a big part, but desecration of the Eucharist. I mean, if it's something that's done intentionally, I mean, like, what's the worst? Is it excommunication or?
Yes.
Okay.
And then for a cleric, you can have loss of the clerical state.
Okay.
So that could be one that's done as well. Excommunication, interdict, other punishments like that. So yes, there can be certain punishments to fit the crime. And there's two reasons. Some are to reform the offender, but some are to safeguard the community. So
but what if someone what if someone was willing to go to confession for that? So that would mean that the ultimate punishment of excommunication wouldn't exist, or
they could be reconciled to the church, of course, but the form of confession is different than the public forum for crimes. So some, again, they can still be sorry, but they committed the crime.
Sure.
So we do want to reform the offender. So if they truly repented, there could be a chance, of course, they would be back in the church's good graces. And most excommunication would involve some chance to reconcile. There could still be consequences, like a loss of office, for example. A pastor messes things up big time. He could lose his office of pastor, maybe with no sin involved. He just didn't do a good job.
Yeah.
Or even willingly that he repents of that later, he still lost his office.
Yeah.
So there still has to be justice. Like we see, for example, with purgatory, right? There's God's justice requires satisfaction for the sin committed, temporal punishment, but his mercy then forgives the eternal punishment. Both fit together.
Talking with Father Eric Culler, who is the Judicial Vicar, Diocese of Toledo Tribunal, and the pastor at St. Richard in Swanton. And when you get all these cases, how does that weigh on you? Because, I mean, these are serious cases. You say you try some of the lesser ones, and I mean the higher ones go to Rome, but still, I mean that has to weigh on somebody who's making these decisions.
They're serious again, and there's built into the sentence itself, the final decision that we would render is prayer. So it's always done within kind of prayer of Lord, guide me to make the correct decision in this. And again, like Catholics, we're always both and, right? So it's you both use your human intelligence to weigh the proofs and to consider the case, but also use faith to have God guide you in the proper decision. Because again, we want to balance justice with mercy as well too. And true justice can't go against truth, so we have to acknowledge the truth that is there, but also want to reform the offender and to bring mercy to those who need it.
Now, evidence would in a criminal case, could that be brought? I mean, they would be the same kind of evidence that we brought before you. Is that correct?
Criminal cases. Again, I haven't done criminal cases myself.
Yeah.
We rarely have those, but it could be, if it's also a civil crime, they will have the civil courts finish their case first. Then some of that evidence could be admitted into our process as well. But also interviews are the main thing. There can be documentary evidence that's taken into account too. But again, it could be like visiting a site. I mean, there can be all kinds of on-site interviews like that. Again, it's something that wasn't there wasn't focus on crimes in the church in the 83 Code originally, but it was a lacuna in the law. They found they had to remedy that because all the problems we had in the church, obviously, they had to fix that in 2010. Other times, Pope Benedict and John Paul II had to make better allowance to protect people against crimes.
And how much do you have to keep up with what's currently going on? I mean,
constantly. Our joke in canon law class was, what law did Pope Francis make this week?
Oh, wow.
That'll be a new segment on Morning Offering. I'll recommend that to Ron and Dave.
But again, law is a living thing, so of course it must constantly grow and evolve. So it's not unheard of. Again, it's even like I said, 1917 they made a new code, said this is good for all time. It's great. Within 10 or 15 years, like, well, this is kind of out of date. Constant updating is needed.
Wow.
So I can't imagine, just based on what you just said, I can't imagine, and maybe he does, Pope Francis just comes up with a new law. He's got to have staff.
He's advised, of course, about that.
Okay, they recommend, hey, we've got a problem we're going to make this change, and I'm sure he has to sign off on it. But that's how it's handled. I mean,
and he has various dicasteries or the departments of the Holy See. They might say, hey, we found this problem is happening a lot. Perhaps we could the law could address this issue.
Okay.
Or like, for example, the accounts for legislative texts. They're the ones who would answer questions about the law itself, like say, I'm not sure what this means. They would clarify the meaning. They have been working on a revision of the penal code of the church, the book 6 about delicts or crimes. So they have been working on it for a while. And they presented to the Pope, say, hey, we think this is going to be good. It then answers the problems people have had or the questions that we've had to field. So they, of course, would advise him, say, we think this law needs to change. Or again, you make a law and you see, it doesn't quite take account for this situation. We got to fix that.
Wow, fascinating.
Wow, it is. And very, very, it can be very complex. I mean, you have so much detail to it, and I'm already lost. So that means that means you know your stuff. So,
in canon law, it's interesting. There are technical terms, of course, but it's very common sense as well, just like Roman law was, where someone could just walk up to me in the street and say, Judicial Vicar, I have a case for you. And they can then present their case to me. I got to write it down. We have to notarize it. But even so, they can meet me in person and say, I make this petition. Let's hear this right now. So I write down what they say, and they can make it in person,
Wow. Well, Father Culler, that does go into how does somebody petition, because they'll go into something we're going to talk about here in just a few moments with the annulment process. So how does somebody petition for case to be reviewed?
Yeah, again, annulments are mostly what we deal with. So primarily we have case sponsors in various parishes, and also priests and deacons are trained to assist with that. And we made some fillable Word documents to make it easier for the person. There are certain requirements for a petition, like who are you, where do you live? So can we hear, are you in our diocese even? Where were you married? If it's a marriage case, who was your former spouse? What witnesses do you want to propose? So there's certain things they have to have. So we made a nice little template they can use for that purpose. And they would just fill that out. We have a little guidance about how to do that. And then they just sign it and bring it to us.
Are they both Catholic, usually the parties, or
for marriages? It really depends. There's no set situation. It always involves a Catholic in some fashion. Otherwise, we wouldn't be involved as a tribunal. So usually, either the person is going to marry a Catholic, needs to be free to marry, to look at a previous marriage, or it could be two Catholics, could be a Catholic and a non-Catholic. Anything's possible. What are the grounds for annulment? What makes a marriage not valid? Yeah, so there can be a couple different grounds. There's some about incapacity. So we have to be capable of marrying, for one thing. So these are some of the newer grounds recognized according to the development psychology and things we've learned. The most common one is grave defect of discretion of judgment. So the person, they didn't have sufficient understanding, sufficient internal freedom, and a good critical evaluation of the decision to marry. The decision to marry is not just, I think I'll have chocolate ice cream today. It's kind of a bigger deal. So you have to think a little more about it than other decisions you make in your life. Or if the person's in a severe mental situation where they're not free to marry, they can't marry. You can't be held to the impossible. That'd be one example of that. That could be some incapacities, for example. There can be some impediments. The person's not old enough. They're too closely related. Those are some situations there. And then defects of consent. So the person, they said a certain thing, but they were lying at the time. That's a big problem when you lie during your vows, It's called simulation. Or they can
what would the lie be?
The lie is basically the vows. They don't want to be a permanent marriage, don't want to be faithful, don't want to have kids, don't want to support the spouse, things like that. Then also they could be in severe error. The Vatican called the hippie mentality is the word they used in the fast for it. The person, the free love, no, marriage doesn't matter, man. So they could have such a deficient understanding based on their background, their own family perhaps. They don't even know that marriage should be faithful or it should be permanent. Those are possible. There's many other grounds as well.
So if you're, I heard that if you're in a situation where you maybe it's known even prior to marriage that if I ever caught you doing this, I'd be out of here, and I heard that kind of disqualifies.
That could be a future condition. Could be one of those. Yeah, and it's not just. I hope. We distinguish very carefully with certain proofs for this, but it's not just, I hope we can do this one day. It's like, no, you'll be a doctor in 5 years or I am gone. That'd be a future condition. Nah, I can't do that. No. That could be one, for example. Or there can be fraud. People can be deceived about their spouse, about a serious problem. I always reference that old Mike Myers movie, So I Married an Axe Murderer. Kind of a thing you should disclose to your future spouse. So something very serious you probably should know first.
You go to the extremes, Father.
Extremes make good examples.
But maybe that's a very good point. But it's
something seriously. A person was They never shared they were convicted of multiple crimes or that they have a serious problem. And it can be they themselves lie about it to the spouse, or a third party lies. Even if they're set up by their friends, like, oh, they're fine, no issues. They themselves don't lie about it, their friends do lie.
Wow, I would never known that.
There's every possibility. Oh, yes.
And I'm sure you've seen it with evidence that's been presented.
And I haven't seen everything myself, thank the Lord. But the Roman Rota, we base our decisions. We'll talk more about that on their decisions, and they give you a good sample of what happens in the worldwide church. And there's every situation you could imagine.
Wow. So this is cataloged. I mean, it's all part of record. And,
oh, yes.
Yeah. So the documents that you're supplied, you mentioned before, you do a petition, and now that we're talking about the annulment process, so somebody says, I want to see if I guess my marriage was null. That's the proper.
Or was it invalid?
Invalid. So you fill out all the paperwork, and that's like a permanent record. I mean, that's part of the case, or you guys don't keep it, or you don't care?
We do keep case files, but again, it's a confidential process. People are often concerned about this. The parties to the case can see it. We can see it, officers of the court, but we can't share that with other people. They themselves can see it. Their former spouse can see it, but they can't take the case file with them and show it to the public. So it's a confidential process in itself, so people don't need to be concerned about that. But yeah, there's certain documents they would present. We have an application packet on our website also. So there's a petition you fill out, then also basic documents and info they give us so we can decide the case.
How long is the packet?
The packet, it depends on what kind of case you're doing. So the basic one, it's going to be 8 pages of info. And mostly it's like, who are you? Who's your former spouse? Birth dates, marriage date, things like that. So we can get a good fix in our mind of what's involved.
So, when we get to on the other side of this break, we'll have to talk a little bit about, well, what if one person wants the annulment and another is resistant to that? Because I'm sure that's very common.
It does happen.
Or if the other party can't be found. I mean, I'm sure they could just disappear.
Those are all good points. Yeah. Oh, yes. We've dealt with all those.
Yeah, we try to come up with a few things. I mean,
so if I'm sure this is probably one of the something that you're doing on an almost daily basis. I'm sure.
Yes.
I mean, it's sad, but I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that were previously married that either don't want anything to do with the marriage, and or they're seeking remarriage, or I don't know. I mean, how many times do you run into a situation where somebody was married years ago and they don't know if that even counts, or and then I mean, what kind of a dilemma or a pickle does that put them in? I mean, because you could be. I think we could talk about more on the other side, because I'm discussing.
We're getting up to our break, but it is a fascinating conversation, and a lot of questions that come about it. So it is a topic that certainly I was thinking about, because I mean, just in terms of what it offers, but obviously marriage is the covenant, so we want to make sure we emphasize that, but. There are situations that come about within the annulment process. Faith with Reasons with Father Eric Culler and you today here on Faith with Reasons.
Are you or someone you know hurting from a past abortion? Contact Project Rachel for confidential help in starting your healing journey. Please call 419-260-5811 or visit hopeafterabortion.org. God's mercy is abundant and waiting for you. Project Rachel is here to offer confidential help on your journey to healing.
You know what's kind of mind-blowing about intercessory prayer? God generally only grants the prayers that fit what He wanted to do anyway. So what's the point of us asking? Why does He tell us throughout Scripture to ask for things in prayer? I think He chose to wait on our prayers to give us His blessings. And I think He chose that because He wants to share the joy of being distributors of His grace with us. He wants us, by our requests, to unleash His healing, His blessing, and His miracles in the world. It wasn't enough for Him to just bless us. He wanted to share the joy He has when He blesses with us by making us necessary parts of that blessing. Archbishop Fulton Sheen said that the graces of God are hanging from heaven by silken threads, and prayer is the sword that cuts them down. So ask God boldly for things today and share the joy of raining His grace down on a needy world. That's what intercessory prayer is about. Prayer changes things. Send us a message at connect@reallifecatholic.com. This is Chris Stefanik from reallifecatholic.com.
Every weekday afternoon at 3, join us for our live and interactive Divine Mercy Chaplet. Do you have something or someone you're praying for? Imagine the power of hundreds of people praying for your intention. We have several ways for you to share your request. You can visit our app and go to the prayer request button, send an email to chapletprayer@gmail.com, or call our prayer request line at 419-868-2966. Here at Annunciation Radio, we're praying for you.
Now, back to Faith with Reasons here on Annunciation Radio.
Hey, welcome back here. Shayne Stanfield today with producer Tim filling in for Ron.
Yeah,
Finn.
but I do have a last name, thank goodness. How many people probably know that? Because we hear producer Tim all the time.
And today we're very blessed to have Father Eric Culler here with us live in the studio. He's the Judicial Vicar of the Diocese of Toledo Tribunal, and he's also the pastor of St. Richard Swanton. And I want to know which job is more pressing with your time. I get sort of
It just varies based on in the church year. Holy Week, of course, there's more in the parish to do. Christmas time,
yeah.
Sometimes there's a bit of a lull, like parish life. There are ebbs and flows, like any family. So sometimes those are. That's busy. The tribunal is pretty much constant. So
yeah. There's always work to do there. Yeah.
There's always something to do.
Well, we were just getting into discussing the annulment process, and there's probably more to discuss than the half hour provides. But as we were talking off air, one thing that we probably should start off with. Somebody that may not be aware of all of the rules of the church, and they find themselves, or maybe they're questioning whether or not they're in a valid marriage. Mm-hmm. And, I mentioned the folks that may not be necessarily practicing Catholic, but they know that they're Catholic, and maybe they want to get right with the church or something, or they hear something on the radio, and they realize that they went to Vegas 10 years ago for to get married. Mm-hmm. And so how does the church handle that process? And then of course we got those situations where somebody knows that they were previously married and they were remarried. And obviously not in the church, or maybe they did acknowledge when they got married. And then what do they do? Do I have to get an annulment for that previous marriage? So there's a couple of situations here. I suppose we should begin by talking about.
Yeah, and again, so we see that marriage is a natural relationship God made in creation. So all human beings have the natural right and ability to marry unless they're impeded by those incapacities we said. So if two Hindus marry, it's valid. To Christians marry, it's valid. But for Catholics, again, to much is given, much is required. We have a higher bar required for us to show forth our faith in the gift of the sacrament of matrimony. So Catholics must be married in a church with a priest, deacon, or bishop and 2 witnesses, according to the canonical form is what it's called. So we have a higher bar for us because we've been given more graces, the gifts of the sacraments, the sacramentals, the communion of the saints. So we have to witness our marriage in that way. So if a Catholic doesn't marry in that fashion, the marriage is null. So what we can do to redress that, if you realize like, oh, I'm in a null marriage right now, you can do what's called a convalidation. Essentially, you get married because you are not married. Mm-hmm. So you make your vows before priest, deacon, bishop, and 2 witnesses in the church. You are married, and that's your date of marriage. Actually, is that point. So if it's situation C, you're a pastor. We're glad to help with people who find themselves in that situation. But again, it's part of the higher bar that Christ set for us, frankly, by saying you have the grace, much is expected of you. So we have to witness to our faith in the holy sacrament of matrimony by making our vows in the church. If two Christians marry, for example, someone becomes Catholic later, they were previously married, and they're still married to that person, their marriage is still valid. Nothing has to be changed. Mm-hmm. So if they were married before conversion, they're still married, they become a Catholic, the marriage is still valid because they had a right to marry. Often people, they'll approach the tribunal because they were married, they were divorced civilly, and then they were remarried outside the church, and they want to have their marriage recognized in the church, So they have to investigate that first marriage to see, was it valid, or am I in fact free to marry because no marriage took place? And there's what annulment is versus a divorce. Mm-hmm. It recognizes what Jesus said in St. Matthew's Gospel, unless the marriage is unlawful. He said marriage is forever, but unless the marriage is unlawful, if there are conditions from the beginning where a marriage could not have been formed, that if that's the case, the marriage was invalid. We thought it was a valid marriage, it was not. Now, if you hear this and you're married happily and you said, oh no, maybe my marriage is invalid because I had one of those grounds apply to me. Marriage is presumed valid till the contrary is proven. So your marriage is valid. Don't worry about that. If you're in a marriage, like married 30 years, happily, you say, oh, maybe I wasn't perfect when I got married. That's okay. And we presume your marriage is valid, and it is valid till the contrary is proven. So that's something that people can be concerned about, too.
And is there like a reasonable doubt like there is in the Constitution and everything?
Well, no, is we just presume marriage is valid.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, like that bar of you have to reach a certain.
They would have to
be over.
Have an annulment trial, have to be proven at trial. Yeah. So until that, your marriage is valid. No worries.
So those that are listening that are in a healthy marriage now, they don't need to sweat anything. I mean, they're just presumed. But where this becomes a problem is if the marriage fails, there's a civil divorce, and they want to know. If they're pursuing a remarriage at some point, they want to know if it was a valid marriage. That's when this becomes important.
Exactly. And we should also say, I keep clarifying this to people, just being civilly divorced does not bar you from the sacraments as a Catholic. That's a purely civil law thing. Yeah. People think, well, I'm divorced, I can't come to church anymore. No, that is wrong. Because a civil divorce has no effect whatsoever on the reality of your marriage. The government can regulate the purely civil effects of marriage, like inheritance and stuff. They are incompetent to deal with your real marriage, the truth of your marriage. So if a merely civil divorce may be necessary to protect someone in abuse cases, or if the spouse is financially ruining the other, going to be bankrupt, there can be where a civil divorce is necessary. In God's eyes, you're still married, though, because marriage is forever. Christ himself said that. So just being civilly divorced does not bar you from the sacraments.
But we also have people who are concerned about receiving communion because of this. Because if they don't have their marriage annulled, they can't receive the sacrament.
Yeah, so it's not true. If you're simply civil divorced and not remarried, so if you're not acting against your marriage by being in a new marriage, then you can still receive the sacraments. It's only in those cases where the person has remarried after a valid marriage, they're married outside the church typically, they cannot receive the sacraments until they're reconciled, because they're not free to marry until that annulment is granted.
One question in these cases, what weight comes in from the pastor or the deacon that comes into this when you're looking through the evidence?
And they can be a case sponsor for the case, so they often write a letter for us just kind of summarizing, or if they have some other information, they could share that with us. So we often call them the case sponsor if you want to approach your pastor. And many pastors and deacons are very happy to do this. Some they're so overwhelmed with other jobs, they have helpers in the parish. It's always good to have helpers. So we have other case sponsors in parishes and regions who can help you through this process to begin the process.
Now, the letter that you just mentioned, is that they're actually acting perhaps as a witness as to something that they may have observed?
They can be a witness, but typically they're more as the person's pastor.
Okay.
So I've known this person for this long. Here's my take on why that first marriage was invalid. I think it should be granted. They give us a basic analysis.
Okay. How much weight is taken into that?
It's considered. Yeah, typically they won't give us like severe proofs. That comes later in the process. But we want to hear their opinion, of course.
Okay, so let's walk through the process. And I know that we mentioned something in the first half hour. These difficult cases where somebody knows that they need to seek an annulment, but they have the former spouse refuses to participate, is very combative about the situation, or perhaps the other person the whereabouts are unknown. So what do you do with one-sided petitions? Only one side of information. You've got nothing to work from.
It is difficult, but always we have to cite or make the former spouse aware there is a trial, because they're affected too by it. Their freedom to marry will be decided also by this process. So we have to at least inform them a trial is happening if it's a formal process case. The normal annulment case, there are others that don't require that. But if it is that case, we have to at least tell them it's happening. If someone is worried, well, they're violent, they might hurt me, we can suppress the petitioner's address. The petitioner has no right to know where the person lives, so we can suppress that. We can withhold the libellus of the petition until later in the process if there's a worry the respondent, the other former spouse, will lie or something and corrupt the process. We have to at least let them know it's happening, though. If we don't, the process is null from the beginning, so we have to do that. If they don't respond at all, we can keep going. It's nice to have their side of the story, and we send them a response from them to say, do you want to take part in this process? Just know it's happening, or never contact me again. And most choose one of those latter two. So if they don't respond, it's harder to get evidence. We need more witnesses in that case, but the case can proceed.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of concern with, and we want to emphasize this, abuse cases.
Yes.
Especially severe abuse cases. I mean, as someone who sees these cases, it has to break your heart with that, but it's happening more and more. So the encouragement that you have in terms of deciding these cases, and also the encouragement if somebody is in a bad situation about seeking that annulment. How does that play in?
Well, again, annulment only has to be sought if you're looking to maybe be free to marry in the future. So again, you're not bound to seek it. If you're convinced my marriage was valid from the beginning, I don't want to ever remarry, that's fine. You don't need an annulment. But if you think there might be a possibility to marry in the future, you can seek that. Again, the civil divorce is the means to protect you from financial ruin or from physical harm or restraining order. So use the civil government. That's what they're there for. They want to help you with that. But we would help with the actual substance of the marriage to see, was it invalid from the beginning? And there are certain safeguards we can do, but we have to at least let the former spouse know it's happening. Just like the civil court has to tell them also divorce happens. They have to be a party to it as well.
Father Eric Culler joining us here on Faith with Reasons, Judicial Vicar, Diocese of Toledo Tribunal, talking about annulments today, marriages, and some of the things that he goes through in some of the cases that he sees. And I know that those seeking annulments get frustrated by the process because it is long and lengthy. How much on the average does it take, and what are maybe some of the steps that we haven't covered that you would want to talk about?
Well, the biggest thing is to make sure we get your petition as soon as possible, because some people will tell us, I've been in this process for a year. Well, we just got your petition, so you have it from our perspective. We can't work until we have the petition application. So if you can, with your case sponsor, complete that as soon as possible and get it to us so we can start the process. So give us, again, the documents we need, the application, petition. And then if you can find out where the former spouse lives, that helps a lot. Otherwise, we have to search for them and try multiple times because we have to be sure we tried to find them. If not, the case is null. So we have to work really hard. That can delay the process a lot. And also the witnesses that people choose to support their case, to give testimony, many times they will not respond to us. And their witness is key to actually deciding the case. So that delays the case the most. We wait months and months, keep calling them and calling to get the evidence. So those are usually the delays we have on the petitioner side of it. Our own delays are just from a lack of staff. We just don't have enough people to do this. We got Father Nathan Bachrath just joined the tribunal, so we're very excited to have him with us. That should speed things up a bit. But then there's certain time limits we have to follow by the law. We cannot derogate from those or change them. So it just takes a little bit. But again, if you on your side can have people respond right away, get us stuff as soon as possible, that helps a lot.
What are some of those time limits?
Oh, there's different ones. Like usually they're either 15 days or 10 days is typically the length of time. We usually give 15 working days or 10 working days because the mail has been slow many times to get people apprised of situations. The longer ones would be at the end where there's the final discussion. There's about a month for the defender of the bond, the one who defends the marriage and says, no, this marriage was valid. That's his or her job to do that. They have a chance to make a case. The petitioner also has a chance to make a case. We give a month to really make their best argument. Those are some of the longer time limits.
And so do you make the recommendation to Rome, or are you making the decision?
We make the decision.
Okay.
Yeah, there's only certain cases reserved to Rome. I mentioned some of those crimes in the church are reserved to Rome, but almost always for a marriage annulment case, almost always we handle the whole thing ourselves. Now, like any court, there's an appeal system. So if we were to rule in the negative or rule in the affirmative, the annulment marriage was null, but then the other party objects to it, they say, nope, it was valid. They can object and they can appeal either to Rome directly or to our appeals tribunal.
And is the decision, deferred until that time?
It is exactly, yes.
Okay.
Just like any appeal. So those appeals cases are shorter because there's less involved. Usually we have enough evidence in the first instance. They just might say a few new things they want to present in their case. So it can be appealed to Rome, which takes longer, of course, because they have a lot of cases, or it can go to our appeals tribunal, the Youngstown or Steubenville. What
about children? And are they required to testify at all?
We prefer they not testify because almost always they weren't around when the parties got married. In some cases, where
the rental marriage,
if it was a second marriage, they can testify if they want to. We usually just discourage that. Obviously, we don't want to harm the family with that, but sometimes they do want to because they were an adult maybe when their parents these two got married. Their parent was already they had been born much sooner, and so that could be something. But typically, if children are not involved.
Okay.
So what kind of information for those that aren't familiar with the process that you're looking to gather when you're putting the application together? Because I've heard a lot of people say that they spend months going back what happened and trying to recall what was leading up to the marriage, maybe what took place on the day of the marriage. And are we looking at many pages of information, or is it short and sweet? What because you end up reading the end product. So
I do, yeah. Well, in the beginning, there's less required, so that sort of introspection wouldn't come till later in the process. In the petition or the libellus they present to us, they give a summary. So we don't want it to be too complicated. You have to give us enough to go on those. So they give a summary of their background of each spouse, what was the problem from the beginning, and what happened as a result of that. So that's the libellus or petition. And the application packet is more like documents to gather, like their baptism certificate if they were Catholic, marriage license, divorce decree. And if you can't find those, they can be obtained from the county. A new copy can be obtained. So not so much in the beginning. It's more just basic documents than just info like when was the marriage, how many children were born in the marriage, things like that. It's only later when we have the instruction phase we gather the evidence officially. And then we want to do that later because based on the ground or reason they say their marriage was null, we tailor the question to that ground.
Okay.
I was to ask everything under the sun. It takes forever. And so we say, nope, we don't care about those. We want to know, zero in what is this reason you're saying? Was that in fact the reason? Was the marriage truly invalid for that reason?
So it's up to the applicant then to look at the various potential defects and pick one and say, I think this is the reason why I think my marriage was null.
It is, yeah. And the case sponsor can help them with that. We have a nice summary of the grounds of nullity with examples for each ground too.
Okay.
So almost always the major ones would be grave defect of discretion of judgment, which does require some serious mental psychic anomaly, either grave immaturity, not just being youngish, but being grave immaturity or some mental situation. That's a very common one. Oftentimes simulation. The person went into it not intending what marriage is. Those are more common ones, or error.
Okay.
They grew up with no understanding of what marriage really is.
And they seem like, to me, just listening to you now, they seem like very broad categories where you could really look at trying to, it seems to be a little bit easier for someone to fit their situation in.
Yeah, again, they're not specific to any one person's life situation. Like we said, the law has principles we apply to the concrete, but the proofs require, there are certain evidence required for each ground to be proven. So that's why when a person gives a petition, we would look at it and say, that ground doesn't actually apply like you think it does. We think this one actually applies instead. So we also weigh in on it and see actually you mean this, I think, right? Don't you? So people don't have to worry, I'm not a professional canon lawyer, I can't make this decision. We help you with that if you just describe to us what was the problem from the beginning in the marriage, the background of each, so we can say, okay, you're saying this, I think you mean this ground applies.
Okay, so you would make that correction on their behalf.
We do help them, yes.
Yeah, okay. What you're describing here seems to fit better in this other category, or maybe you have a better case.
Exactly.
Because there could be multiple areas of defect.
Yeah, several grounds can apply. There could be more than one.
All right.
So do parties represent themselves? Do they have somebody represent them? Or
now, like any court, they can hire an advocate who's an official canon lawyer to represent them. Case sponsors are like an informal help at the parish, someone who helps them present their documents and everything. But if people wish to, they'll have to pay that person for his or her time, an advocate. But you can hire an attorney, so to speak, to help you with the process. But it's common sense. So really, just when we say hey, do you want to say anything? You can respond then. But if you're like, no, it's kind of complicated, I would like to hire an advocate. We have examples of people that can help you with that.
And then this goes into cost. So how much?
$0.
Really?
There's no cost for an annulment at all. The Pope, our diocese has been that way for decades. Then Pope Francis made a law for the universal church too. So you cannot charge for annulments. And so we haven't for a long time anyway. Now we ask if you want to make a donation at the end, that would be helpful. Because again, otherwise the person in the pew next to you has to pay for your annulment. Is that really fair? So some donation would be nice. At the end of the process, we'll send a request for that. But there's no required cost. Only if you hire an advocate, you must pay them for their time. That's only fair.
You would think that there would be some sort of an application fee, but there's nothing.
There is not. There's only one. For absence of form, we ask for a processing fee. It's helpful if you do that. But again, it's not required. So no one can be barred for lack of ability to pay.
How does your job, your position as the judicial vicar and seeing all these cases, how do you avoid not getting sour on marriage?
Yeah, it's difficult because we see the fallenness of human nature. Like anything, our faith shows us that we don't want to be naive and think everything's perfect, there are no problems. but also to realize that good triumphs. That Christ has already won. The devil is lost because the cross, Christ triumphed forever. So despite the messiness of life and people falling into sin or just bad behavior, bad decisions, Christ still triumphs in the end. So I think it's realizing God's mercy in the midst of all this. It can be depressing to see various marriages enter shipwreck, as Rome calls it. Again, bad situations, but to realize that there are many other good marriages out there, and also God's mercy wants to call us out of any problems we had in the past.
Well, but on the other hand, how important is that your role to be able to make a decision in these cases?
Yeah, it's a big weight. And that's why I take it seriously, and I pray about the cases and weigh all the proofs. And so it's a serious process. That's why people say, why can't you just give me the annulment? I don't give you the annulment. I see, is that the case from the beginning? I can only declare the truth. Yeah. It's not my opinion. I have to weigh it against the evidence and what Rome has said for their kind of method of examination. So I base it on previous things like that. It's never my opinion. It's based on my judgment but I inform it with evidence, with truth, with the practice of the Roman Rota, the appeals court, things like that. So it's a very serious. We take marriage very seriously because Jesus said this is for life, always. And so we want to respect that, but only if there was some fundamental defect or flaw, then of course mercy recognizes that person's not bound to this.
So we mentioned time frames previously and turnaround times. I don't know, and maybe I missed it. The from beginning to end, typically, what does it take? I mean, I'm going to submit an application today to see if my previous marriage was null, and I've submitted everything that I needed to submit. So let's call this day one. When would I expect to hear whether or not it truly was null? I mean, and is there a deadline to receive that?
Yeah, I mean, ideally we fall those deadlines. We have certain ones we have to respond after a set time. We can't act before the deadlines. The goal is the ideal Rome has said is 1 year to finish a formal case, but it's very difficult to achieve that. So with our current staffing situation, it's more like a year and a half to 2 years to finish a formal case. So I'm trying to rectify that. And actually, if any of you would like to volunteer at the Tribunal, we could certainly use your help. We need help with just like office work and things like that. If you live near Toledo, that'd be awesome. But yeah, so the more people helping us, the more fast we can process cases. And I think with Father Backrath and the team now, that'll be a big help too. So things are progressing. But it's about a year and a half to 2 years based on, again, how quickly we get responses too. That also sets the case back.
You mentioned that earlier that, witnesses may not want to participate. Delay. And key witnesses, that's a problem.
Yes, and we need witnesses again too. Because, again, the biggest thing is you have to make your case to us, and we don't know what you know, so please share that with us in the process. People often think, well, I know a marriage is invalid, but you have to share it with us because we don't know your situation, so please share the details with us so we know. But witnesses help to make your case even stronger. It's not that we think people are lying, but they have to make a stronger case to reach a certain bar of evidence, a certain threshold.
Are we seeing more cases since COVID?
There'd be a delay, I think, in the uptick because people would have civil divorce first, then we'd see the annulments. So our caseload has been consistent last couple of years, about 100 new cases a year. Wow. That we have in our diocese. In the past, every time a new code comes out, the cases swell. We had like 300 to 500 in past years in the early 80s. Other dioceses much larger than this have many more cases, so we have average about 100 documentary and formal cases a year, certain kinds. There's other absence of formal cases and such, but yeah, about 100 a year is the new cases we get.
What are the dangers in a case for perjury? And how do you find that out?
Yeah.
Because usually it's he said, she said.
There is that. There are certain ways to tell, again, the Rota, and this is why we want the person's former spouse to take part in the process. They think, oh, let us lie about everything. We can tell if they're lying. It's pretty obvious, pretty quick, if they're just lying through their teeth about something. So again, we take people at their word, but we also investigate. Trust but verify, as the saying goes. So there's certain, we would see if it's consistent with other evidence, if there's documentary proof in the divorce decree to support that, if it's feasible, so we do look at everything. We try to weigh it.
Who does those investigations?
The judge himself investigates, or I can appoint an auditor to interview the person directly. An assessor could be an expert to help me. We also have psychological experts we consult with if it has a psychological ground, like grave defect of judgment. We get them view the case, and they would say, is there a true psychopathology here? They may say, yes, it's very severe, or no, there's nothing at all. So they give us some also help.
And this is based on the details that are provided.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
What about the psychologist? I mean,
that's who we can install. Yeah, psychology experts.
I mean, do you have connections with those people? Or do they? I mean, because you can't take somebody who's like, oh yeah, I know this psychologist. No,
exactly.
Because it'd be one-sided.
We ourselves at the court appoint court-appointed experts, and they are psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors who are typically Catholic, who understand the Church's teaching on marriage, and don't just think every marriage is invalid because no one can really marry. We say, no, you're wrong. There has to be someone who has a Catholic understanding, but also recognizes the fallenness of human nature. So we have several experts we consult with.
Are there any other sources, books? I mean, obviously canon law, but not everybody reads through canon law. Or that would be helpful for somebody who is thinking about this process.
Yeah, there are some really good books. There's one, I forget the exact title, by a priest of Italy, actually. He writes, especially for case sponsors. I'll have some copies of that available. There's things like The Invalid Marriage from Father Lawrence Wren. It's a little older book. It has some information about that. There's always new things by Midwest Theological Forum. They have quite a few books they put out. Spain puts a lot out, University of Navarre, and others like that. So I'll try to think of some more resources, but there is, it's called The Invalid Marriage or When is Marriage Invalid, things like that. There are quite a few good books. Very good.
So I have to ask, I don't think it was mentioned in the first half, but based on your serving on the tribunal, can lay people participate in this? I mean, as canon
lawyers,
I'm sure there's lay people that are licensed canon lawyers.
Yes.
And so you don't have to necessarily be a priest to be sitting on a tribunal.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Joshua Korf is one of our judges.
Okay.
He's a layman, married, and so he is also one of the judges in the tribunal. The defenders of the bond are often lay people as well. So just with the lack of priests, and we have to minister in parishes, we're needed for the sacraments and things only we can do. There are more and more lay faithful being canon lawyers.
Wow. So their process to become a canon lawyer would be just what you went through.
Yeah, they had to go through the same schooling, same requirements and everything. We had some prior things as a priest in seminary. We did have canon law courses and, of course, a master's in theology. But they also have the training we have for canon law.
Wow. And again, real quickly, how long of a process is that?
It's 3 years of school.
Okay. Yeah.
Or I did 2 years continuous through the summers also.
Wow.
Well, you never knew what you were in for when you started.
Just in case anyone out there is interested in becoming a canon lawyer, so there is a need. You're saying
that's right. Give me a call.
Okay.
All right. I'm looking to you, Father. Father Eric Culler joining us, Judicial Vicar with the Diocese of Toledo and Faith with Reason. Shayne Stanfield, myself, Tim Boulware. It's good to have all this information. I hope it was helpful for people.
Wonderful conversation. Thank you.
And you can hear the rebroadcast on Saturday at 10, or we'll have it online as well. Coming up next week, author Teresa Mull on her book, Woke Proof Your Life. Thanks for joining us on Annunciation Radio today, and we look forward to talking to you next time.